communicate? Do you prefer to make a phone call? Do you text? Email? Do you send a message through Facebook? I mean, how do you tell people what's on your mind? Communication. It's the real estate show. Welcome to the Real Estate Show. My name is Rick Naples. I'm the owner-broker of Zone Realty LLC. You zone your home. It's a real estate agency located in Plainville, Connecticut. Now, I've been a licensed realtor for many years and a broker these last few years. And one of the conversations that always comes up is, how do we communicate between the realtor and the client? And that's a question that's asked all clients. I mean, do you prefer that we give you a phone call? Do you prefer that we send you a quick little text? Maybe contact through email is the best for you, or some other way of contact. Communication is key, and I can't stress that enough. You have to have all the parties that are involved in a real estate transaction talking to each other. This helps eliminate misunderstandings. It also keeps the deal moving along its track so that the transaction goes from point A to point Z and completes and gets to that closing. If there's any kind of communication breakdown during the transaction, an email isn't read, a text isn't seen, sometimes things can get a little bit muddled. And this is important right from the get-go. I mean, a realtor, when they're going out to list the home, is going to make contact with that seller, or maybe that seller made contact with them, and they're going to set up an appointment, an expected time as to when they're going to come out and do their listing presentation. And there's a lot of things that are involved in that listing presentation that I won't go into here now. But communication becomes very important because you want the seller to understand what is going to happen when the realtor comes out to see them. The realtor also wants that communication because they want the seller to keep that appointment. There's nothing worse in my business than when you make a communication with someone and you set up an appointment to do something, whether it's to show a home, do an open house, go out on a listing appointment, meet an inspector, or the number of different things that realtors do. And there's a miscommunication, or there's a conflict of interest, or somebody gets something wrong as far as timing is concerned, so someone ends up getting slighted or ends up wasting their time or showing up someplace where the other party doesn't show up. Communication is also very important as the process of a sale goes along. Now, when you're a seller and you've communicated with your realtor and you've gone over putting the house on the market and all the different things the realtor is going to do, and now the house is now for sale, there's going to be communication needed because other realtors that are representing buyers that are capable of purchasing your home need to be talking to each other. The realtor needs to know what the buyer wants to know whether or not that home's going to fit their particular needs, and then the realtor has to communicate what time they want to come to see the home. That's going to be communicated to the listing agency. The listing agency is going to communicate to the seller on that time. The seller is going to okay or deny that time or add any particular particulars to it to the listing agency. The listing agency is going to get back to the buyer's agent, who's going to get back communicating to the buyer. So there's a lot that gets into play. It's important that all the parties are talking to each other. Now, as you're going through this whole communication process, this whole transaction, you're going to find that there's a lot of different ways that different things come up. Now, I've talked on the real estate show in the past about questions. You know, when you have a question, when you have a thought, when you have a concern, when you have a hypothetical, whatever it might be. Good communication between you, either a seller or a buyer, and your realtor is very, very important. And that's why from the very, very beginning, it's important that you discuss how those communications are going to happen. Now, some realtors are very they can use technology very, very well. They're very adept. Some prefer text as opposed to an email or a phone call. Some people don't like to use their cell phone, except for phone calls, and they would prefer that the realtor calls them, and if they don't answer the phone, leave a message, and then they'll get back to them when they can. There's some concerns sometimes with the old-fashioned phone call. I mean, first of all, when you're calling somebody on their phone, they need to be in a position to answer the call. Because we're all using cell phones mostly now, people are mobile. People are moving around. They're driving their car. They're at work. They're in the grocery store. They're with a friend or a relative. They're at a school play. Whatever the situation might be, they might not be able to pick up and answer the phone. And if you're dealing with something where time is of the essence, in other words, scheduling is showing, or something along those lines, or something's going on, leaving a message might not be the best way to communicate. So sometimes as an alternative, realtors will say, I'll call you, but I'll also send you a text. Now I know as a realtor myself, when my clients contact me, a lot of times I'll say to them, if you have a general question, communicate with me through email. This allows me to respond to you in writing, in detail, to answer your question. If it's a quick, you need a yes or no, then obviously give me a call. But I also say back it up with a quick text. The reason why I like the text is because if I'm involved in something, I'm sitting in front of a TV camera and I'm filming the real estate show and a client contacts me with a question, if they send a text, I can see it on my phone. I don't have to necessarily answer the phone. I don't have to read an email. I can see it in a text, and as soon as I can, I'll get back to that client with an answer to the question or with whatever the response might be. Some people don't like using their cell phones at all. They prefer to communicate through some kind of social medium. Some of the bigger ones that are out there sometimes are the best ones. Messenger is another way of communicating. Sometimes that's a way of, if I'm an individual and my cell phone is sponsored by my company, and the rule is I'm not supposed to use my cell phone for personal business or personal calls, sometimes I might say to the realtor, communicate through my personal email or through Messenger. That could be a way of doing it. Part of that whole communication conversation is to talk about timing. I'll always say to someone, if you want to call me anytime you want, night or day, any day during the week, weekends, holidays, doesn't matter. You can call me. However, I'm going to be right up front. Most of the time when you call me, I will not answer the phone. And I don't want that to sound like I don't answer my phone. I'm involved in other things, and I don't have the ability to pick up the phone and talk to you right away. So send me a text. A text is a way I can respond pretty quickly. Most realtors will tell you that if you send them a message or you send them an email, they'll respond within a reasonable amount of time. And I get very cautious about that terminology of reasonable amount of time, because my reasonable amount of time might be different than your reasonable amount of time. And as a result, we can have that miscommunication. I mean, I sent you a text and you never responded to me. Or I tried to call you 15 times and you never answered your phone. Or did you ever see that email I sent you? Have you ever had that happen? Well, when you're in business, you have that happen a lot of times, because sometimes people's expectation is they have a question, they want an immediate answer, and circumstances sometimes don't allow that answer to happen as quickly as they would like. So communication becomes a tool that you use from beginning to end in the real estate transaction.
Hey, it's Rick Naples from Zone Realty. So what is the best definition of communication? Communication is a process that involves sending and receiving messages through either verbal or nonverbal methods. Communication is a two-way means of communicating information, form of thoughts, opinions, and ideas between two or more individuals with the purpose of building an understanding. In a real estate transaction, communication starts right at the beginning. It is an important step at every step of the process. Communication is key. It helps to head off misunderstandings or confusion. Both buyers and sellers need to communicate on many levels. Communication is the only way to make the process run smoothly. I'm Rick Naples, Realtor, Broker, Zone Realty LLC, 860-385-2218.
I'm talking about communication here on the Real Estate Show and how important it is from the very beginning of the start of the process when you're looking to buy or sell a home. Now there's other communication, not only between you and your realtor, whether it's your buyer representative, the buyer that's representing you, or buyer agent that's representing you, or the seller agent that's representing you. There's the communication between you and the other parties that are involved in the transaction. Now for the buyer, it becomes someone like the mortgage officer, the person that's putting together the finances in order for them to be able to purchase the home. How are they going to communicate with them? How are they going to get paperwork back and forth? What paperwork is needed? How quickly do I need to get that paperwork to you? And so on and so forth. Once everything is done, there's the different things that are involved in the transaction, like for instance, contacting a home inspector, communicating when you're available for a home inspection to be done, what's going to go on during that home inspection, what do I do when items come up, and so on and so forth. Constantly communicating as to what's happening. Talking to your attorney when the attorney gets the clear to close from the mortgage company. When is the closing going to be? When is the closing going to be? How much money do I need to bring? So on and so forth. And all along that process, talking to your realtor, who's guiding you and giving you advice as you're going through the transaction process. Now, buyers have a little bit different communication needs than a seller does. The seller's communication needs are just as important because, again, you can't sell your house, whether you're using a real estate agency or you're using your favorite realtor or whether you're just trying to sell it on your own, without communication. Now, communication is a skill. Communication is something that we all have to strive to do better at. You can't be indirect when you're communicating with someone when it comes to a business transaction. You have to be as concise and mean what you say and say what you mean. How's that one for you? You can't be wishy-washy. You can't say, well, you could do this, or maybe you could do that, or, I would do this, or I would do that. People are looking for direction. They're looking for an answer. This is why sometimes, as I said earlier, I have a habit of telling a client, if you have a question that you feel is going to need some precise answers, sometimes it's better to send it to me in an email. Because this will give me the opportunity to research it. You can send me a question via text and I will also research the answer, but sometimes I don't respond right away because I want to make sure that I gather all the information that you're looking for. Now, sometimes I'm going to communicate to someone, or they're going to communicate to me those 3 favorite words of mine. I don't know. Let me find out. Hold on a minute. Whatever 3 words you want to pick. Sometimes in communicating with someone, you want to make sure that you're saying something or giving them the information that's usable to them. As you're going through the real estate transaction, there's a lot of different points where the transaction can start to go sideways. One of those big points is when a buyer purchases a home, the seller has accepted the offer, all the communication's been done, and now a home inspector goes out and goes to inspect the home. And issues come up. There are things in the inspection report that the buyer is concerned about, and the buyer wishes to communicate to the seller what those concerns are. Whether they're a change that needs to be made, a repair that needs to be made, something that needs to be addressed. And that's always done through writing. There's an actual report that your realtor will prepare, which lists the items that you as a buyer would like the seller to take care of. And that's agreed to by the seller through signatures. It becomes an agreement between the buyer and the seller, a communication between the buyer and the seller. And the buyer has the opportunity to accept what the seller is going to do, and the seller has the opportunity to reject what the buyer wants, and so on and so forth, communicating through their prospective realtors. Now, there's all kinds of different things that can happen during that case. There's all kinds of different ways of satisfying everybody. Again, it's the communication, either through paperwork or agreements or contracts or verbally or text or email or message or whatever it might be, where the 2 parties agree to whatever they're agreeing to. And there's a clear communication. You don't have a situation where you have an assumption. I did an inspection report on a house. I wanted this particular item addressed. The seller never responded. I assume they're going to take care of it because I made them aware of it. And then, of course, it never gets done. Or you've communicated something and it's been agreed to be done, and then the time comes to close on the property and you do what's called a walkthrough. And as you're going through the property, you're looking specifically to see if the items you agreed to being done are done, and they're not. Now you have another communication, and that's the communication between you and your attorney as to how to handle that situation. Attorneys are great communicators. Realtors are fantastic communicators. But sometimes we as individuals lack in our ability to communicate what we mean to another party. Sometimes we don't say what we mean. Sometimes we don't mean what we say. That's an everyday occurrence. I mean, we're all humans. So that's why the realtors become so important in the communication between all the different parties to make sure everybody's on the same page, as the old saying goes, that everybody understands what's going on, so there's no misunderstandings, there's no miscommunication.
Say what you mean what you say. How does miscommunication happen? If there's a breakdown or an interpretation different than what is said or understood, misunderstandings and confusion happen. If not immediately caught or clearly explained, it can put a deal in jeopardy. Attorneys are excellent communicators. Realtors are fantastic communicators. Whether by call, text, email, or even message board, they do their best to communicate what needs to be said. The best practice is to do it in writing. This way, it is clear what was said and when it was said. I'm Rick Naples, broker realtor, Zone Realty LLC, 860-385-2218.
One other aspect of the importance of communication between all those parties is to avoid the, well, you said, or he said, or she said, or they told me kind of situation. That's a third party hearsay communication. Sometimes it's not clear what the other person or party has said or is doing. So that's why realtors will put a lot of stuff in writing. There's normal conversation that happens, but realtors are very careful to make sure that their buyer or their seller understands what is happening throughout the transaction of the deal. And a lot of them sometimes prefer to put everything in writing, let's just put it that way. I mean, obviously there's going to be regular conversations that go on, and that's fine. But when it comes to details, realtors will put it in writing. I do something for my clients that I'm sure a lot of other realtors do. I do what's called a pre-closing advice letter. When I have a home that is listed and it's sold and we're about a week before the actual closing is going to happen, everything's been done, we have a clear to close, all that communication, whatever's been done, I send my seller a pre-closing letter. It has nothing to do with anything legal or attorney. It's just kind of some of the things that I want to make sure that they have done. Like, for instance, what happens with the keys to the house? I mean, how do the keys get to the buyer? Are we agreeing that you're going to bring them to the closing and hand them across the closing table? Are you going to leave them in the home? Are you going to give them to the agent? You know, how the keys going to move around? You know, those kinds of things. How is the money going to move around? You know, when can I expect my check? When, you know, do I get that from the attorney at the closing? Do I have to wait a day for it? You know, those kinds of things. How much is it going to be? You know, whatever. When does the lockbox come off the house? You know, is that lockbox going to be on the house during the closing? Is the agent going to ever pick up the lockbox? What about the sign? If there's a sign in front of the house, when does that come down? Am I buying a house that was for sale and then I move into my new home and the realtor sign is still sitting up in the front yard? You know, what's the timing on that? How about utilities? Who do I contact? When do I contact them? How do my utilities get off of my name and go to the buyer's name? And just a multitude of other things. So sometimes I send this little pre-closing letter and I basically give some information and kind of tell them what the processes are going to happen that have nothing to do with the closing itself. These are kinds of things I want the seller to consider as we're moving towards the closing. I mean, if we're a week away from closing and you still haven't contacted your utility companies, you know, now's the time to do it, obviously. So a lot of little details, a lot of little questions. I like to put it in writing. It kind of gives a little checklist. I'm a big listing person. I like to do notes and I like to do lists, you know, to-do lists types of things, just to keep myself on track or make adjustments as I'm going along. And you might find that that's helpful too.
Pre-closing. Answers to some leftover questions and the I wonders. Zone Realty LLC communicates a list of things that are asked or wondered about, like what to do with the keys to the home, what dollars to bring to the closing, where is the closing, what time, when does the lockbox come off the door, when does the sign come down, when do you contact your utility providers, and other little details not necessarily thought of. Most of these are communicated well before your closing. But it's a good idea to list them as things do get a little hectic. I'm Rick Naples, owner-broker of Zone Realty LLC, 860-385-2218.
My name is Rick Naples, and I am the owner-broker of Zone Realty LLC. You zone your home. This has been the Real Estate Show. I thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.
Nick Augustino right here at the East Side Restaurant. We always have the complete full dinner menu. Knockwurst, bratwurst, sauerbraten, potato pancakes, red cabbage, rice pudding, cream pies, all the desserts that Germany had to offer. I always do something different. Yes, I do. I brought seafood to the beer garden at the East Side Restaurant. East Side Restaurant, your German destination restaurant in Connecticut. Tiki-taka, tiki-taka, hoi, hoi, hoi!
I'm your host, Kurt Barwis. Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Andrew Lin.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Veterans Corner. My name's Chuck Wooden.
Decision for ourselves for this week, if we want to be made well.
Hi, welcome to the crack of dawn. It's Dawn Lombardi. I'm starting the painting. It's going to be the cliffs with some water. Love it.
He took me on the sets of Lost in Space, Batman.
Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time.